What if I told you that the creature who saves your life might be the very soul you've overlooked for centuries without truly seeing them? This is the story of an immortal king who lost everything in one cursed night, and the servant girl who became his salvation. A woman whose bloodline the world had tried to erase. A king too proud to acknowledge those beneath him. And one impossible moment of ancient magic that changed both of their eternities forever. Stay with me, because by the end of this story, you'll never look at those who serve you the same way again. You'll understand why sometimes our greatest miracles come from the souls we've deemed powerless. And you might just realize that someone in your life right now, someone you've never truly seen, is waiting for you to finally acknowledge their worth. This is a story about second chances across lifetimes, hidden power in humble places, and the kind of love that transcends the boundary between mortal and immortal. Let me take you back to that blood moon night in the ancient castle when everything shattered. Welcome to Vespera Stories. While you are here, please hit the subscribe button and comment your view on the story and where you are watching from. You know, sometimes even immortality has a way of humbling us when we least expect it. Let me tell you about Lord Ascelin, a vampire who thought he had eternity figured out. Ascelin was the kind of creature you'd read about in ancient legends. Powerful, immortal, the vampire king ruling from his Gothic castle perched on storm-battered cliffs. For 300 years, 3 centuries, he had reigned with absolute authority over the supernatural realm. His castle stood as a monument to his dominance, its towers piercing the night sky like obsidian daggers. Those ice-blue eyes of his could freeze a soul with a single glance, and his silver-white hair flowed like moonlight itself, marking him as different even among immortals. He had built his kingdom from blood and shadow, surviving wars that had destroyed other vampire houses, outlasting rivals who'd turned to dust while he remained eternal. The vampire nobility bowed to him. The Grand Council, 12 ancient lords older than memory itself, respected his rule. Human servants moved through his castle like ghosts, invisible and insignificant, existing only to serve their immortal masters. Lord Ascelin had everything an immortal could desire: power that could crush armies, wealth accumulated over centuries, loyalty enforced through fear and tradition. He walked through his vast library surrounded by grimoires older than kingdoms, sat upon a throne carved from a single piece of black stone, and believed with absolute certainty that nothing in existence could threaten him. But on this particular night, the night of the blood moon, all that certainty was about to crumble into ash. For 300 years, he'd never known true fear. He'd never understood what it meant to be vulnerable. He'd certainly never imagined that his salvation would come from the most unlikely source imaginable: a human servant girl in a simple maid's uniform, carrying secrets in her blood that would shatter everything he thought he knew about power, worth, and what it truly means to live forever. The Grand Council would arrive at dawn. Lord Ascelin had prepared for this judgment for months, assembling evidence of his kingdom's prosperity, documenting every treaty and triumph of his 3-century reign. The ancient vampire lords met only once every 50 years to evaluate the ruling houses, and their verdict was absolute. A king found worthy continued his rule. A king found weak faced execution at sunrise, his ashes scattered to prevent any chance of resurrection. Ascelin had no doubt about the outcome. His kingdom was stronger than ever, his treasury overflowing, his military unmatched. He'd dismissed his vampire court hours ago, sending Devon, Sinfel, and Victor away with confident instructions to prepare the throne room for tomorrow's ceremony. He wanted this final night alone to review his documentation one last time in the vast library that had been his sanctuary for 300 years. The blood moon hung heavy in the sky outside his windows, painting the castle stones crimson. Ascelin barely noticed. He sat at his ancient desk surrounded by scrolls and leather-bound volumes, his ice-blue eyes scanning centuries of recorded victories. Everything was perfect. Everything was. The pain hit him like a dagger made of sunlight. Ascelin gasped, his hand flying to his chest. For a moment he thought it was merely exhaustion, but then the agony intensified, spreading through his body like wildfire through dry timber. His vision blurred, the room tilted. He gripped the edge of his desk, knuckles turning white, and felt something he hadn't experienced in 3 centuries: terror. His reflection in the darkened window showed the truth. His normally luminous silver eyes were dimming, the immortal glow fading like dying embers. His pale skin, always flawless and cold as marble, had begun to crack like ancient parchment. Dark veins spiderwebbed across his hands, his neck spreading with horrifying speed. This wasn't illness. Vampires didn't get sick. This was something far worse. A curse. A forbidden curse. Ascelin stumbled from his chair, his supernatural strength abandoning him. He crashed against a bookshelf, sending ancient texts tumbling to the floor. His mind raced through possibilities even as his body betrayed him. Who would dare? Who possessed magic powerful enough to pierce his defenses? He'd surrounded himself with the finest protective enchantments, warded every entrance, trusted only his inner circle. He tried to call out for help, but pride stopped the words in his throat. If his court saw him like this, weak, vulnerable, mortal, the Grand Council would hear of it before dawn. They would declare him unfit and execute him on principle. A dying king was worse than a dead one. Ascelin collapsed to his knees among the scattered grimoires, 300 years of power draining away with each passing second. Outside, the blood moon watched indifferently. The castle loomed around him, cold and vast and suddenly terrifying in its emptiness. The same stones that had witnessed his glory now bore witness to his destruction. He was utterly, completely alone. Or so he thought, until he heard the footsteps in the hallway. The footsteps were soft, hesitant, accompanied by the gentle clink of glass and the whisper of fabric against stone. Ascelin looked up from where he knelt among the scattered books, his dimming vision struggling to focus on the doorway. A young woman appeared, dressed in the traditional black and white uniform of the castle servants. She carried a tray with fresh candles and cleaning supplies, her dark hair tucked neatly beneath a white cap. Her eyes widened in shock when she saw him collapsed on the floor, surrounded by ancient texts, and looking nothing like the fearsome immortal king who usually occupied this library. "My lord!" She set down her tray quickly, but stopped short of approaching him, trained instinct keeping her at a respectful distance. "I'm so sorry, I didn't know anyone was still here. The schedule said the library would be empty tonight. I can come back." "No." Ascelin's voice came out as a rasp, barely recognizable. He tried to stand, failed, and felt humiliation burn through him hotter than the curse consuming his immortality. "Leave. Tell no one what you've seen here." But the girl didn't leave. Instead, she took a step closer, her gaze moving from his face to the books scattered around him. Her eyes lingered on the open grimoire at his feet, and something changed in her expression. The subservient fear gave way to focused concentration as she studied the symbols on the ancient pages. "That's the curse of broken eternity," she said quietly, her voice carrying an unexpected certainty that made Ascelin's fading eyes snap to her face. "The dark symbols there, and the binding marks. It will turn you to ash by dawn." Ascelin stared at her in disbelief. How could a servant girl possibly recognize ancient curse work that even his court wizards would struggle to identify? "What did you say?" She met his gaze directly, and for the first time he truly looked at her. Beneath the humble uniform and downcast demeanor, intelligence burned in those warm brown eyes. "It's the curse of broken eternity, my lord. I've seen drawings of it in the forbidden texts, the ones kept in the locked section you think no one can access." "How do you—" Another wave of pain cut through him, and he gasped, his body convulsing. When the agony subsided enough for him to speak, fury and desperation warred in his voice. "Who are you? How do you know these things?" The young woman moved closer now, kneeling beside him with a grace that seemed at odds with her servant status. She picked up the grimoire, handling it with practiced care, and when she looked at him again, there was something ancient in her eyes that belied her youthful appearance. "My name is Tamara, my lord. My grandmother was burned as a witch 70 years ago, accused of practicing forbidden magic. They destroyed our family name, took our lands, forced my mother into servitude here in your castle." She paused, her fingers tracing the curse marks on the page. "But they couldn't destroy the knowledge that flows in my blood. Her gifts, her wisdom, her power. They all live on in me." Ascelin felt the weight of her words settling over him like a shroud. A witch. A hidden witch, living under his roof as an invisible servant. Under any other circumstance, he would have had her executed on principle. But now, with dawn approaching and his immortality bleeding away with each passing moment, he faced an impossible choice. "Can you save me?" The words came out barely above a whisper, pride crumbling before the reality of his own mortality. Tamara met his eyes, and he saw both fear and determination in her gaze. "I can try, my lord. But the ritual to break this curse requires something you've never given any human before." "What?" "Trust." Tamara had been 12 years old when they burned her grandmother in the village square. She remembered the smoke, the screams, the way the townspeople had cheered as the flames consumed the woman who had healed their children and eased their dying. They called her a servant of darkness, a corrupter of souls, a witch who deserved nothing but fire and ash. Her grandmother's only crime had been knowing too much. She could read the old languages, brew remedies that actually worked, and see patterns in the world that others missed. In a realm ruled by vampires who hoarded power jealously, such gifts in human hands were considered threats. When Lord Ascelin's vassal lord demanded proof of loyalty from the village, the frightened humans had offered up their healer as sacrifice. Tamara's mother had grabbed her hand and run that night, fleeing before the vampire hunters came for the rest of their bloodline. They'd left everything behind. Their cottage filled with dried herbs and ancient books. The garden where her grandmother had taught her to recognize healing plants. The life they'd built over generations. Her mother had burned every grimoire, destroyed every talisman, erased every trace of the magic that flowed through their veins. "Forget what she taught you," her mother had whispered, as they huddled in the forest, watching their home burn in the distance. "Forget the words, the symbols, the power. Being invisible is the only way we survive now." So they'd come to the castle as servants, 2 more nameless humans in a sea of the overlooked and undervalued. Tamara's mother worked in the kitchens until exhaustion claimed her 5 years later, her spirit broken by grief and endless labor. Tamara inherited her position, her uniform, her invisibility. To the vampires who passed her in the corridors, she was nothing more than furniture that occasionally moved. But Tamara hadn't forgotten. Late at night, when the castle slept and the immortals retired to their chambers, she wandered the endless library. She discovered that Lord Ascelin kept the most dangerous texts in a locked section protected by enchantments designed to keep out vampire rivals, but the spells had never accounted for a human with witch blood. To them, she was beneath notice, beneath threat, beneath consideration. She'd spent 15 years teaching herself everything the vampires thought they'd destroyed. Ancient languages written in her grandmother's careful hand appeared in manuscripts she should never have been able to read. Ritual diagrams hidden in plain sight among decorative illustrations revealed themselves to her eyes alone. The castle itself became her university, and her grandmother's voice echoed through every page she absorbed. Tamara learned about vampire politics and immortal warfare. She studied the feuds between covens and the intricate web of alliances that kept the supernatural world from tearing itself apart. She memorized curses and counter-curses, protective wards and breaking rituals, healing magic and destructive power. She became an expert in the very knowledge that had killed her grandmother, all while pretending to be nothing more than a simple maid who changed candles and dusted shelves. She'd never imagined she would actually use any of it. The knowledge was supposed to be insurance, a secret comfort that she was more than the invisible servant the world saw. But tonight, kneeling before a dying vampire king surrounded by the books that had educated her in secret, Tamara realized that 15 years of hidden study had prepared her for exactly this impossible moment. Her grandmother's voice whispered in her memory, "Power hidden is power preserved. When the moment comes, you'll know." The moment had come. Tamara led Lord Ascelin through corridors he'd walked for 3 centuries, but now each step was a battle against the curse devouring his immortality. He leaned heavily against the stone walls, his breathing labored, while she supported his weight with surprising strength for someone so slight. The castle seemed to mock him with its vastness, every shadow holding the promise of his approaching end. They descended spiral staircases that twisted deeper into the castle's foundations, past the wine cellars and storage chambers, down to levels that predated even Ascelin's long reign. The air grew thick with the weight of ancient magic, and the walls themselves seemed to pulse with power that had been sealed away for centuries. "The ritual chamber," Tamara said softly, pushing open a heavy iron door that groaned on hinges unused for generations. "Your ancestors built this place for blood, magic. The stones remember every spell cast here." The chamber was circular, carved entirely from black stone that absorbed the light from Tamara's candle. Symbols covered every surface: walls, floor, ceiling, ancient runes that predated modern vampire covens. In the center stood an altar stained dark with centuries of ritual sacrifice. Ascelin collapsed against the altar, his strength nearly gone. Through his dimming vision, he watched Tamara move with practiced confidence, lighting candles at specific points around the circle, her movements precise and purposeful. This was no frightened servant girl fumbling with half-remembered magic. This was someone who knew exactly what she was doing. "The ritual of shared essence," she explained, retrieving a ceremonial blade from a hidden alcove. The silver gleamed wickedly in the candlelight. "It requires your blood willingly given, my power freely offered, and complete trust between vampire and witch. Without that trust, the ritual will fail, and the curse will consume you before dawn." She held out the blade to him, and Ascelin understood the magnitude of what she was offering. His blood, his life force, placed entirely in the hands of a human whose grandmother his people had murdered. One wrong move, one moment of revenge, and she could end him more thoroughly than any curse. "Why?" he asked, the question encompassing everything. Why help him? Why risk exposure? Why save the king whose kind had destroyed her family? Tamara met his fading ice-blue eyes with unwavering brown ones. "Because someone needs to break the cycle, my lord. Because I've spent 15 years invisible in your castle, and I've seen that not all evil requires malice. Sometimes it just requires indifference. And because..." She paused, her voice softening. My grandmother taught me that healing is the highest form of magic, even when the wounded don't deserve it. Now, friends, before we continue with what happened next in that ritual chamber, I need you to do something for me. If this story is touching your heart, if you're feeling the weight of these choices and the power of what's about to unfold, show me by hitting that subscribe button. Comment below and tell me, have you ever been invisible to someone who should have seen you? Or have you been the one who failed to see? Share your story, because this tale belongs to all of us who've ever overlooked someone extraordinary. Ascelin took the blade with trembling hands and drew it across his palm. His blood, ancient and dark, pooled in his hand. "Then teach me to see," he whispered. Dawn approached with relentless certainty. Lord Ascelin could feel the sun's threat even through the castle's thick walls, a pressure building in his bones that promised annihilation. But something else was building too, the steady return of strength flowing through veins that had been emptying toward death just hours before. Tamara's ritual had worked. The ancient words she'd chanted in languages older than his immortality, the intricate patterns she'd drawn with his own blood, the power she'd channeled from depths he hadn't known humans could access. All of it had shattered the curse binding him. As the first rays of sunlight touched the castle's highest towers, Ascelin's eyes blazed back to their full ice-blue intensity. The Grand Council arrived precisely at dawn, 12 ancient vampire lords materializing in the throne room in swirls of shadow and blood-red mist. They found Lord Ascelin waiting for them, restored and radiating power, with a young woman in a maid's uniform standing quietly at his side. The inspection proceeded as planned. The council examined his records, questioned his policies, tested his magical defenses. They found everything satisfactory, as Ascelin had known they would. What he hadn't anticipated was the way his perspective had shifted during those dark hours. When Council Lord Malir dismissed Tamara with a wave of his hand, calling her that human servant cluttering the throne room, Ascelin felt something inside him rebel. The council departed with their approval granted, and Ascelin immediately called an emergency assembly of his vampire court. Within the hour, the throne room filled with nobility: Devon, Sinfail, Victor, Christoph, Azarad, Ishmael, and the female vampires, Bianca and Guinevere. They came expecting celebration. Instead, they found their king standing beside the castle's lowliest servant. "This is Tamara," Ascelin announced, his voice carrying the weight of absolute authority. "She saved my life last night when dark magic threatened to destroy me. From this moment forward, she serves as my royal advisor on all matters of magical security and ancient threats." The silence that followed was deafening. Then Zadimus, Ascelin's second-in-command for over a century, stepped forward. His handsome face was twisted with disbelief and barely contained rage. "You elevate a human servant? My lord, have you lost your mind? She's cattle. She's food. She's powerful enough to break a curse that would have killed me." Ascelin cut him off coldly. "Which is more than any of you accomplished last night while I fought for my existence." Christoph and Azarad exchanged horrified glances. Bianca whispered something to Guinevere that made both women recoil in disgust. The message was clear in every face. This was an abomination, a violation of everything the vampire hierarchy held sacred. But Ascelin had made his decision. Tamara was given quarters in the East Tower, rooms that had housed vampire nobility in centuries past. She was provided with access to the forbidden libraries, authority over magical defenses, and a small staff of humans, Tammy, Craig, and Corbin, who looked at her with something like hope in their eyes. The castle's human servants whispered about the girl who had risen from their ranks. The vampire nobility plotted in shadows, their resentment growing, like poison in still water. And Tamara, working late in her new quarters surrounded by ancient texts, felt the magical residue she'd been tracking, and realized with growing dread that the curse hadn't been an isolated attack. Someone inside the castle wanted Lord Ascelin dead, and they were still hunting. Tamara spent 3 nights tracking the magical residue, following traces of dark energy through the castle like following bloodstains only she could see. The curse that had nearly killed Lord Ascelin bore a signature, a unique pattern of power as distinctive as a fingerprint. Whoever had cast it had been careful, but not careful enough. Dark magic always left echoes, and Tamara had learned to hear them. The trail led her to the West Wing, to chambers occupied by the vampire nobility. She worked in the shadows of early morning when even immortals slept, using her old invisibility as a servant to move unnoticed through corridors she now had legitimate access to. What she found made her blood run cold. Hidden beneath a loose stone in one of the storage rooms, she discovered components for the curse of broken eternity. Dried nightshade from the Shadowlands, silver dust harvested under a dead moon, a vial of virgin's tears mixed with vampire blood. These weren't ingredients you stumbled upon. They were gathered with specific, deadly purpose over months or even years. But it was the enchanted correspondence that confirmed her worst fears. Letters written in blood ink, sealed with wax that bore the mark of the Nightshade Coven. Messages discussing the removal of the old king and preparation for new rule. And every single piece of evidence pointed to the same location, the same chambers, the same vampire. Zadimus, Lord Ascelin's second-in-command, his trusted ally for over 150 years. The vampire who had stood beside him through wars and political upheavals, who had sworn blood oaths of loyalty, who had been granted access to every secret and defense of the kingdom. Tamara's hands shook as she gathered the evidence, carefully placing each item into a spelled container that would preserve their magical signatures. She understood the magnitude of what she was holding. This wasn't just betrayal, this was treason on a scale that could shatter the entire vampire court. Zadimus hadn't acted alone. The Nightshade Coven's involvement meant this was a coordinated assault, years in the planning. She traced the connections deeper, cross-referencing names in the correspondence with vampires she'd observed in the castle. The Nightshade Coven was led by 3 ancient female vampires, Viessa, Drusilla, and Odile. They'd been rivals to Lord Ascelin's bloodline for centuries, always seeking opportunities to expand their territory and influence. If they could install their own puppet on the throne, someone like Zadimus who owed them everything, they would control the most powerful vampire kingdom in the realm. The curse had been the opening move. Weaken Ascelin before the Grand Council's judgment, ensure he appeared unfit to rule, then execute him according to ancient law. With Ascelin dead and the throne vacant, Zadimus would step forward as the logical successor, secretly sworn to the Nightshade Coven's service. But the plan had failed because of one variable they'd never accounted for. A servant girl with witch blood who knew how to break curses meant to be unbreakable. Tamara carried her evidence straight to Lord Ascelin's private study, her heart pounding. She found him reviewing military reports, his silver-white hair catching the candlelight as he worked. When he looked up and saw her face, he immediately set aside his papers. "What have you found?" She placed the spelled container on his desk and watched his expression shift from curiosity to confusion to devastating comprehension as she explained everything. When she spoke Zadimus's name, Ascelin went absolutely still, the kind of stillness that only apex predators achieve before they strike. 150 years, he said quietly, his voice carrying a weight of betrayal that made even Tamara's heart ache. I trusted him with everything. They couldn't move against Zadimus openly, not yet. If he suspected they'd discovered his betrayal, he would flee to the Nightshade Coven's protection, and the conspiracy would scatter like shadows before light. Worse, without absolute proof presented before witnesses, accusations against someone of Zadimus's standing would divide the court and potentially trigger civil war. So they set a trap, and Tamara was the bait. She spent 2 days creating false grimoire pages, documents that appeared ancient and powerful, describing a ritual called the Eternal Binding, a spell that could supposedly merge a vampire's immortality with a witch's power, creating something unprecedented. She made sure to leave the pages where Zadimus's spies among the human servants would find them. Made sure rumors spread through the castle about her late-night research into Forbidden Union magic. The first warning came on the 3rd night, delivered by a blood letter, an enchanted parchment that appeared on her pillow, the words written in what looked disturbingly like human blood. "Cease your meddling, witch, or burn like your grandmother. This is your only warning." Tamara showed it to Ascelin, and his ice-blue eyes blazed with cold fury. "He threatens you in my own castle." "Good," Tamara replied, steadier than she felt. "It means he's scared. Scared people make mistakes." The assassination attempt came during a state dinner 2 nights later. Tamara had been invited to dine with the vampire nobility for the first time, a deliberate provocation that had Zadimus and his allies seething with resentment. She'd barely lifted her wine glass when Chantel, her human friend, who served as a taster, collapsed, convulsing to the floor. The poisoned wine had been meant for Tamara. Chantel died in minutes while vampire healers stood by helplessly. Their magic couldn't save humans from toxins designed specifically to kill them. Tamara held her friend's hand as the light left her eyes, and something inside her hardened into steel. They set the final trap for the Blood Moon ceremony, a monthly ritual where vampires renewed their oaths of loyalty to the crown. Tamara announced she would be performing a cleansing ritual in the castle's ancient courtyard at midnight to strengthen the magical defenses against outside threats. She made sure every vampire in the court heard about it, made sure they understood she would be alone and vulnerable. Ascelin hid in the shadows of the courtyard colonnade, cloaked by spells Tamara had woven specifically to hide him from vampire senses. They waited as midnight approached, as the blood moon climbed higher in the sky, painting everything crimson. The castle wards flickered at precisely midnight. Someone powerful was tampering with the protective enchantments. Then Zadimus emerged from the shadows, but he wasn't alone. He'd brought Nightshade assassins with him, including the witch Lullaby, whose reputation for dark magic was legendary even among those who practiced it. "Did you really think we wouldn't notice you sniffing around where you don't belong?" Zadimus's voice dripped with contempt as he circled Tamara. "You're clever for a human, I'll grant you that, but you've made a fatal mistake thinking you could threaten us." Tamara stood her ground in the center of the ritual circle she'd prepared. "I haven't threatened anyone. I've simply discovered the truth." "Truth?" Zadimus laughed. "The truth is that Ascelin has grown weak, allowing human filth like you to poison his judgment. The Nightshade Coven will restore proper order. Vampires ruling over humans as nature intended." That's when the magical battle began. Lullaby struck first, dark energy crackling toward Tamara in lethal waves. But Tamara had spent weeks studying the Nightshade Coven's techniques, and she deflected the attack with a counterspell her grandmother had taught her in dreams. The fight illuminated the courtyard with flashes of power, dark magic against light, vampire speed against witch cunning. And through it all, Zadimus kept talking, confessing everything in his arrogance. The years of planning, the Nightshade Alliance, his promise of a new vampire order with humans returned to their proper place as slaves and cattle. He was still boasting when Lord Ascelin stepped from the shadows, his presence like a wave of cold fury washing over the courtyard. The confrontation in the courtyard had given them everything they needed. Tamara had captured the entire scene in an evidence crystal, a magical artifact that recorded not just words and images, but the truth beneath them. Intent, emotion, the unmistakable signature of conspiracy. Zadimus and his nightshade accomplices had tried to escape through blood portals, but Tamara's counterspells had trapped Lullaby, while Zadimus fled alone, leaving his allies behind. His cowardice was now part of the permanent record. For 2 weeks, Lord Ascelin prepared for the most important trial in his 3-century reign. He could have executed Zadimus quietly in the dungeons, could have made the problem disappear the way vampire nobility had always handled inconvenient truths. But every night, Tamara's words echoed in his mind. Secrets fester in darkness. Truth brings lasting peace. She'd saved his life, exposed a conspiracy that would have destroyed his kingdom, and nearly died for her efforts. The least he could do was honor her wisdom, even if it terrified him. The Grand Council was reconvened, all 12 ancient lords summoned back to witness something unprecedented. The throne room filled with vampire nobility from across the realm, human servants lining the walls, everyone sensing that history was about to shift beneath their feet. Lord Ascelin stood before them all, Tamara at his side, and told the truth. He explained the curse, the investigation, the betrayal that had reached into the highest levels of his court. Then he activated the evidence crystal. The magical projection filled the throne room with images and sound so vivid that viewers felt transported to that blood moon courtyard. They watched Zadimus confess his treachery, heard him describe years of conspiracy with the Nightshade Coven, witnessed his contempt for humans and his plan to overthrow the established order. The evidence was irrefutable, damning, absolute. The vampire nobility reacted with shock and horror. But something unexpected happened. Guinevere, one of the female vampires who had initially scorned Tamara's elevation, stepped forward and spoke words that would change everything. For centuries, we've believed our strength came from domination, she said, her voice carrying through the silent throne room. But Lord Ascelin nearly died because we were so certain humans were beneath our notice that we never imagined one could possess the power to save him. How many other threats have we missed because of our arrogance? How many potential allies have we turned into enemies? Other voices joined hers, vampires who had secretly questioned the old ways but never dared speak against tradition. The tide was turning, and even the Grand Council could feel it. Zadimus was captured 3 days later, trying to reach Nightshade territory. He was brought before the court in chains of blessed silver, his power bound, his arrogance finally broken. The ancient punishment for treason was banishment to the eternal darkness, a realm where vampires existed in perpetual starvation, unable to die, but unable to truly live, conscious and suffering for all eternity. As the guards dragged Zadimus away, he looked at Tamara with pure hatred. "You've destroyed the natural order. You'll regret this, witch." But Tamara had stopped fearing threats from those who confused cruelty with strength. The Grand Council's final decree shocked the supernatural realm. New laws were established protecting humans in vampire territories, prohibiting enslavement, guaranteeing basic rights. Lord Ascelin's kingdom became the model for progressive vampire rule, and other covens slowly began to follow. The Nightshade Coven's leaders, Viessa, Drusilla, and Odile, were arrested in coordinated raids across the realm. Their network of conspirators was dismantled. The old order they'd fought to preserve crumbled, replaced by something fragile but hopeful. 3 months after the trial, Lord Ascelin led Tamara through the castle's east wing to a set of doors she'd never seen opened. Workers had been renovating this section for weeks, and the entire vampire court had been whispering about what the king was building in secret. When the doors swung wide, Tamara stopped breathing. The space had been transformed into something beautiful and impossible. High-ceilinged rooms filled with books and learning materials. Comfortable chambers where humans could live without fear. Training rooms where they could develop skills beyond servitude. And on the main wall, carved in letters that caught the light like stars, were the words, "The Tamara Sanctuary, where worth is recognized, not granted." Beneath that, a smaller inscription, "In memory of the wise woman burned for being powerful. May her bloodline finally know peace." Tamara's grandmother's name was there, restored and honored after 70 years of disgrace. Tears spilled down Tamara's cheeks as she traced the letters with trembling fingers. All those years of invisibility, of suppressing who she was, of carrying shame for power she'd never chosen. It all released in that moment like a curse finally breaking. "Your bloodline was never shameful," Ascelin said softly beside her. "It was powerful, and that's what they feared. I'm sorry it took me 3 centuries to understand that fear of others' power is just weakness wearing a crown." He led her to the sanctuary's center, to a room with windows that overlooked the village below where Tamara had been born. The people there were already changing, she could see it. Human children attending new schools, families owning their own land again, hope replacing the resigned despair that had marked her entire childhood. "For 300 years I didn't truly live," Ascelin continued, and his ice-blue eyes held an emotion she'd never seen there before: vulnerability. "I existed. I ruled. I accumulated power. But I didn't understand what any of it meant. You taught me, Tamara. You showed me that immortality without purpose is just an extended death." He reached into his coat and withdrew a small velvet box. Tamara's heart began to race as he opened it, revealing a ring unlike any she'd ever seen. The band was formed from intertwined silver and gold, vampire metal and human, craft merged into something new. The stone at its center pulsed with a soft light, a blood diamond formed from a vampire's essence. "This is a blood bond ring," Ascelin explained, his voice unsteady in a way that made him seem suddenly, impossibly human. "In vampire tradition, it's more than marriage. It's an offer of eternity itself. If you accept, my blood will transform you. You'll become immortal, neither fully human nor fully vampire, but something in between. Something unprecedented." He knelt before her, this ancient king who had never bowed to anyone, and the symbolism wasn't lost on either of them. "I'm not offering you this as your king to his subject," he said. "I'm offering it as someone who was dying in the darkness until you chose to see him. I want you to stay, not because you have to, but because you want to. Not as my advisor or my miracle, but as my equal, my partner, my queen." Tamara looked at this vampire who had learned to be vulnerable, who had chosen truth over comfort, who had allowed a servant girl to teach him what power really meant. She thought about her grandmother, about Chantel, about every human who had suffered under the old ways. And she thought about the future they could build together, the barriers they could break, the world they could transform. "I saw you when you were at your weakest," Tamara said, taking the ring from the box and sliding it onto her finger. "I saw you stripped of power and position, just a soul facing extinction. That's who I fell in love with. Not the king, but the person who existed underneath all that immortal certainty. I'll choose you, Ascelin. I'll choose you every single day of forever." The blood bond ceremony took place under the next blood moon, witnessed by vampires and humans standing side by side for the first time in centuries. Ancient rituals were spoken, new vows were created, and when Ascelin's blood merged with Tamara's, the magical surge that resulted illuminated the entire castle like a beacon. Tamara kept her old maid's uniform in a glass case in her private chambers, a reminder of where she'd come from and what power looked like when it hid in plain sight. She spoke at gatherings across the supernatural realm, sharing her story, encouraging others to look beyond surfaces and see the worth in unexpected places. Lord Ascelin transformed from a ruler who demanded obedience to a king who inspired loyalty. He opened the castle to human education, established councils where mortals and immortals worked together, and proved that strength didn't require subjugation. Together, they became symbols of what was possible when pride gave way to partnership. Their love stories spread through the supernatural world like wildfire, challenging centuries of tradition. Some vampire covens resisted, clinging to the old ways, but others looked at what Lord Ascelin and Tamara had built and recognized it for what it was. Not weakness, but evolution. Years later, when young, vampires asked Tamara how she'd accomplished the impossible. She always gave the same answer. I didn't accomplish anything alone. Salvation isn't something one person does for another. It's what happens when two people choose to see each other truly and build something together from that honesty. And in quiet moments, when Ascelin held her in the darkness they both now belonged to, he would whisper the truth that had changed everything. You didn't just save my life that night. You taught me what life was for. Because that's what this story is really about, my friends. It's not about vampires or magic or ancient curses. It's about the moment when we finally see the people we've overlooked, when we allow ourselves to be vulnerable enough to receive help from unexpected places, when we choose love over pride and truth over comfort. Tamara proved that worth isn't determined by power or position. Ascelin learned that immortality means nothing if you're too proud to let yourself be saved. Together, they showed that the greatest transformations happen when we're brave enough to look beyond what we've always believed. So I'll leave you with this question, dear ones. Who in your life have you been overlooking? What servant girl with hidden power are you walking past every single day? And more importantly, when you're drowning in darkness, will you have the humility to accept the hand that reaches for you, even if it comes from somewhere you never expected? If this story has touched something in your soul, if you're thinking differently about the people around you, then do me a favor. Share this story with someone who needs to hear it. Comment below and tell me about a time when someone unexpected saved you, or when you had the chance to be someone's miracle. Hit that subscribe button because there are more stories like this one, more truths hiding in tales of wonder, more lessons wrapped in magic. Because we're all just one moment away from needing to be seen, and we're all capable of being the light in someone else's darkness, if we're brave enough to step out of the shadows and show who we really are. Until next time, remember, salvation comes from the most unexpected souls, and sometimes the person who changes your eternity is the one you've been overlooking all along.